My name is Fazlun Khalid. I'm the founder and director of the Islamic Foundation for Ecology and Environmental Sciences, based in Birmingham, UK. And we've been functioning as a charity since 1997, but we've been working for maybe 20 plus years before that and trying to lay the foundations of the work based on the Islamic environmental ethic. Well, if I could use a much hackneyed phrase, it was sort of organic in the sense that I did not make a conscious decision that I wanted to be an environmentalist, even I wanted to be an Islamic environmentalist. Uh, but my path led me to asking questions about where we were, where is the human race heading, what is the future for the human race, particularly my family, my grandchildren, together with other children, where are they going? What are we leaving behind for them? Um, are there has to be, or are there deep fault lines in the political economic system that has brought us to this point? We aspire to be, or we brand ourselves the greatest civilization that had ever existed on the earth, but it has brought us to the edge of an environmental precipice. Everybody is predicting dire consequences for the planet and the human race. I mean, all these questions were running through my mind, and in order to find answers, of course, working in human community and race relations, I have the kind of right kind of people around me to begin a dialogue to ask these kind of fundamental questions. And I was also interested in issues relating to poverty, third world debt, famine, hunger, or all these kind of human-related cataclysms, you might call it that. And it was in one of the meetings when I was asked a question: what has Islam got to say about the environment? That was going back nearly 40 years in the early 1980s. And that's what set me on the track of researching uh, this work, asking questions of the scholars who were not able to help me, by the way, rather sadly and significantly. So I went back to university quite late in my life and did a master's uh, on Islam, based very specifically on what the Quran had to say about the environment. And that was the beginning, and that was a trigger, in a sense, to say, yes, this is where I want to go. And working with other people, looking at past writings, past scriptures, working with, listening to people like Sayyid Hussein Nasr, and people like Uthman Llewellyn, who was environmental campaigner, uh, planner in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia particularly. So this is how it happened. So it was a path of discovery. And then, because I felt kind of almost you might say a lone wolf in the field, as far as a lone Islamic wolf in the field, uh, there was nobody else. So I had to go and search and find out. And inevitably, uh, I got um, drawn into academia. And one of my first experiences was when I was invited by Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm to act as a consultant for the Islam part of their series on ecology. So that's how it happened. And again, it wasn't a conscious plan. It just happened. Things were happening around me, and I felt I needed to do something. And you like meet like-minded people, and you work with them. Not necessarily Muslims, well, but there were very few Muslims in the field in those days, and even today, I'm regret to say. So it's more experiential, studying in the University of Life, uh, and working and collaborating with people. And a good example is the Abrahamic faiths workshop that we had in Rhodes. That was the last one I attended. So meeting with like-minded people, you learn more, and you get a wider focus of things that are happening. That's my story. I think that we take a lot for granted, really. And I was only speaking to an academic just yesterday in the north of England, Leeds, and he was a professor of green history, and I asked him the question, when did the word environmentalism, when did the environment as an ism, when did it first appear? You see, and my point is that this is in a sense a challenge for people in the field, and I would say that it didn't appear before Rachel Carson's book in 1962. Before that, people talked about nature, the beauty of the natural world, and this and that. And yes, of course, there were great poetry, and nature itself is poetry in itself. And uh, there were no. So there was a morphing of efforts on the part of big aid organizations like USAID, and in the UK there were Christian Aid and CAFOD and the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and most of the agencies and Oxfam who dealt with famine relief and hunger morphed into environmental and field as well. And this was a process that I was part of. This sort of a gradual transition of a realization that there's something that was wrong. And in my book, I spell out a kind of a continuum of consciousness, which I would call, uh, where people then began to. I think the first conference where people realized there's something wrong with the environment or climate change was in the 1970s, if I remember correctly. And it took a long time from the 1970s, 1990s, uh, the, uh, the Brazilian conference on Agenda 21, and eventually the Kyoto Protocol emerged only in 2005. That was a long, long process. And I sort of, in a sense, my consciousness grew up with that, you see. So people then ask me the question, like you just asked me the question, what about the Muslims then? You see. So in the Muslim world, in the Islamic world, there is no such thing as environmentalism, you see. Uh, but there was behavior. There was what you call the Sunnah. Uh, and the it is accepted in the Islamic world that the Prophet's main preoccupation, the main teaching, was to teach good behavior, you see. And teaching good behavior meant that how you behaved with your brothers, your sisters, your family, your fathers and mothers, your neighbors and your country and your community. But it also meant how you behaved with the environment, your relationship with the tree, with the bees, the birds, the sky, the clouds, because you are part of nature, you see. Now, in the Islamic milieu, that way of understanding nature was organic. But what has happened was that since the advent of what we call modernity and consumerism, it detached people from the environment. It disconnected. I have a chapter in the book called "The Disconnected People," and so the so this is going into a more kind of historical political analysis. I don't want to get too much into that, in the sense that, like every other faith, the Muslims got reduced into ritual. I call them five pillars Muslims. and there was a lack of and the um, and it became something that of how can I put this, of looking back at the past and restating uh, the narrative, restating the Hadith literature, or reciting the Quran. It became that. But the existential reality of the disconnection of the human race from the natural world was not a thing that was consciously understood. You see, and the thing now, the challenge now, is to bring those lessons to the surface and to say, here we are connected to nature whether we like it or not. We need to regain that consciousness, and how you regain that and how you live in the world is, as a Muslim, is in the Quran and in the practice of the Prophet Muhammad. I take the view that every faith, the Abrahamic faiths, the Far Eastern traditions, the the indigenous communities, uh, and all these, and what I didn't say at the workshop we had in Rhodes was that in 1995 I played a role as a chairman of a workshop in Japan, put together by WWF and the Alliance of Religion and Conservation, where 9 different traditions met, and we came to the conclusion that we may have differences in terms of ritual, but we have a commonality in the sense that we are all connected with nature. And our responsibility is to look after the natural world. If we look after the natural world, it will look after us. You see? So I have no hesitation in saying that because of that, we are now, it is mandatory, if I could use that word, for us to work together. Because when I look at my grandchildren, I see the grandchildren, other grandchildren as well. They don't have to be Muslim. They are innocent. They are maybe Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus. They will all share the same faith of what we in this generation and previous generations have created. So we are leaving them a legacy which they have to deal with. You see, and as we chase for the after the good life, what is uh, what is emerging is a bad life, a negative life for future generations. They have to, in fact, to recover from the problems that we have created. So uh, although it is too late, I say that working together, we can, in fact, if we work hard enough and strong enough and collectively, we can leave them a better legacy. That is the important point. That's why we should be working together. The good life today is all about consumerism. You see, and good life today and consumerism is built on uh, having access to a very important resource, which we all have. Is called money. See, and uh, in my work, in trying to get to the root of the problem, I try to get an understanding of what money is all about, because it is involved in every single transaction we make as we get out of our homes. If you go on a train, on a bike, on a motor car, or fly on an airplane, or go to a shop and buy, there is something called money that exchanges hands. So need to understand what is this thing called money. And I refer to the institution called the banks, which we all know, and we have all come to the conclusion that without the banks we cannot survive. You see, it is the modern temple. Uh, and we connect with the temple uh, anywhere at any time through electronic blips, and money has become electronic blips. And I define money in my book today's money as a virus. And it is this virus that we have conjured out of thin air, is created out of nothing, that is in fact at the bottom of the environmental mega collapse that we are now facing. So what I'm really saying is that, to use a much maligned phrase, a much used phrase, to say we cannot change things with the kind of thinking that created the problem. The thinking that created the problem cannot in fact change. If you really want, we have to change radically in order to save ourselves and save our children from ecological environmental collapse. So we need to think about how we can regain this by redefining our methods of exchange and redefining the political economy that we live in today. And it's a hard task because everybody who benefits by us, and in the developed world, it means every one of us, are loath to change. It's a big ask. So what I'm really saying is, if you want to save your grandchildren, you want to save yourself first by thinking about what you're really after. The political economy has to change, and the I think an understanding of that is very important, in that environmental studies should be integral the economics of today, the nature of money, the nature of transactions, the nature of market forces should be integral to the environmental studies curriculum. It is important, and I would. It's so fundamental. I think it should be started at school to children at the earliest grades. Well, why not? Because children begin to use money not understanding what it really is. So why teach children about astrophysics and nuclear physics and all these highfalutin subjects if they do not understand the nature of the very facility that they use in order to buy, what shall I say, a Coca-Cola, exchange that. So people grow up with an understanding, young people grow up with an understanding that money is, of course, it is integral to our lives, but not knowing what it really is. Is that fundamental? Now, when we go further up and we talk about graduate studies and postgraduate studies, and if you want to understand the nature of money, you go into economics. It's a specialized field. But it is economics that is impinging on the environment. So there has to be an integration. I know people are now talking about eco-economics and bringing the economic dimension into the ecological discourse, but that is reduced to putting a price on the natural world. How can you put a price on the natural world with ephemerally connected money? You see, you cannot create money out of nothing and create money in the form of an algorithm and value the tree in terms of the number of algorithms. It doesn't make sense. So, I mean, we are kidding ourselves, you see. I mean, this is the consciousness that we need to inject into the environmental discourse, because fundamentally connected. And this is why I disagree profoundly in the way the sustainable development agenda is run. This is one of the reasons why I disagree, because sustainable development has 17 very important fundamental parameters which all that looked at in isolation, it's wonderful, it's great, it's terrific. Who can deny? But if we are then concentrating on alleviating the lifestyles of the poor people uh, in a sustainable way, because they don't injure the planet in the way that they raise their standards of living to a minimum of minimally comfortable lifestyle. What about the big players? They are totally unsustainable lifestyles where they continue to earn mega bucks and continue to pollute the earth in a huge. Nobody is tackling that at that level. So is the United Nations and all the sustainable UNDP who developed these sustainable development models, why are they not pointing their finger at the people at the top who are in fact increasingly owning more and more and more and more capital, the globe's wealth, and making the famous 1% of the population who are accumulating wealth, and the rest of the 99% are left with the crumbs. You see, this is the so in a sense, sustainable. The idea of sustainable development is compartmentalized into dealing with sustainability with the poorer sections of global humanity, but not in fact uh, tackling the issues of mega corporations that continue to pollute the earth. I didn't have a plan. Uh, I didn't start this work in the 1980s saying uh, I want to start an environmental organization or an Islamic environmental organization, because there was none anywhere at that time. But increasingly, uh, working with people, uh, with NGOs, they had a structure, they had a bureaucracy, um, they had a management system. And I was a loner, but thankfully working with a half a dozen young people had a, who empathized, who had a feeling for this work, um, and trying to uh, research the Islamic ethic in this. And then when it came to so starting this work in the 80s, when it came to the 1990s, I felt sufficiently confident that we had a body of work that we could, in fact, push out into the wider world and claim our niche, as it were, because there was no other Islamic organization. In fact, there still isn't. I wish there were. I wish there were hundreds like us, and it's needed. And I'm not just saying it because the times, as you know, the times are urgent, Sahil. And so when it came to that, one or two of my colleagues suggested, well, why don't you start an organization? I said, okay. Uh, because I had you'll notice from my background, working on human relations and race relations and working in the civil service, I had an antipathy for bureaucracy. So I didn't want to run an organization, create one, and get more bureaucracy, more bureaucratic. So one of my friends then applied to in the UK the thing called the Charity Commission, and we got accepted as a charity. And so we ran as a charity. We have been running as a charity since 1997, and our main forte, I would say, if you could define our work with one word, is education. It's researching the Quran, researching the Hadith literature, uh, researching the Islamic ethic on these issues, writing about them, and most importantly, uh, teaching about them and putting it into practice. That was what was very important for me. Now, our first success story came In 1999, when we were invited by WWF to speak to fishermen in Zanzibar who were dynamiting coral reefs, because WWF and CAI International had worked with these fishermen for years and they found they were not getting anywhere. And because these fishermen were Muslim, they hit upon the idea that giving them an Islamic viewpoint on nature. So I had a telephone call from Zanzibar and I said, yes, I will try, because that was the time I had devised a teaching resource called Quran Creation and Conservation. It's available on our website. You can download it if you want. It's in our resource section, by the way. And I said to um, the person who telephoned me, he was working for CARE International, and it was a US organization. I said, I'll come down. And WWF paid my airfare. I went down and I did this workshop based on 4 themes from the Quran. And I won't go into that, just it's too detailed. But the fact of the matter is the workshop lasted 2 days. And in the third day, the fishermen stopped dynamiting coral reefs. You see? So the NGOs came up to me and said, what have you done? So I said, you witnessed what happened. I didn't do, there was no magic. But the thing is that the fishermen and the religious teachers in the Quran schools there empathize with the word of the Quran, with the scriptures, which says it is wrong to do this, wrong to dynamite coral reefs, and you listen to the word of the divine presence about you can do this, you can't do that. And they said, yes, we cannot break, their words were, we cannot break God's law. We can break the government's law, but we cannot break God's law. And that was quite profound for me, because it sent the message that it works. It can work. It can be made to work. And since then, this same teaching resource, I have conducted these workshops based on these same teaching resources in West Africa, East Africa, Indonesia, Madagascar, and other Muslim countries. And so the work evolved out of that, building networks, building connections. And the last big thing that we did was to working with other agencies. We produced the Islamic Declaration on Global Climate Change. That's also in our website. And now that is translated into 10 different languages, and we are looking for more. So the work expands, and there is a need for it urgently, as we all know, and we continue to work in areas as and when required. So we are in perpetual evolution, if not revolution. It's a continuous revolution. I've been following the COP processes for a long time, and one of the major COP meetings that helped to generate a global consciousness was the 2009 Copenhagen COP meeting, because it created a kind of a dynamic between the United States and China, and they were arguing about who's to blame for global warming. And apart from that, there were lots of NGOs present at that. And that evolved, and the reason why the Kyoto Protocol, asking questions about why successor to the Kyoto Protocol has not emerged, and why the nation states are fighting over an issue which is of profound importance to people all over the world. Why are the politicians delaying this? And then the Pope's encyclical Laudato Si emerged in May 2015. Uh, and it so happened that we were also at the same time working on a declaration, because I took it upon myself to say, this says a watershed time. We need to then, Muslims need to wake up and contribute to the world thinking on these issues. And then we worked with Islamic Relief, who are very, very supportive, more than supportive on these issues. And they provided the bureaucracy, the administrative support, and took up a great deal of the load while we produced the intellectual material. I did the first draft of the declaration, and then we again, if you go to the website, you will see the team that produced it, and there were Professor Ozdemir from Turkey, Professor Baharuddin from Kuala Lumpur, the uh, academics from Indonesia and Morocco, environmental plan of Osman Llewellyn from Saudi Arabia. So a very strong team to produce this, and uh, and we picked on Istanbul because it was central to the Islamic world, and both geographically and theologically central, and it appears to have worked. And people, uh, we had about 20 countries represented, not all of it, uh, but we took a big risk, and I think it appears to, in the absence of anything else, uh, we are there, and there are 10 translations, and the United Nations Environmental Program has accepted it, and the Organization of Islamic Countries, they have endorsed it, and so we think it's a good effort, but that's not enough. Once having produced it, what do we do with it? And I have been having discussions just this morning with Greenpeace, who wanted to be part of this, help us. And I said to them, uh, a summary version of the declaration should hang in every mosque in the world, in every corner of the world. So we have a huge task of educating people, and it is big. I don't know how we are going to do it, but it is important and it needs to be done quickly. So producing the declaration is not enough. We need to raise awareness of it and the implications of it, and get people to then uh, react to the challenges that we raise in the declaration. The problem has been exactly what you stated, which is that how do you get across a resource that you've taken a lot of trouble to produce, encapsulate the ideas and teachings in a booklet, a piece of paper, or a leaflet or whatever, and then ask people to react to that and bring out some results, that is positive, and that will change people's behavior, you know, and that's education, and this is what we are about. And I wish that we were resourced enough. I'll let you into a secret in that we are just a bunch of volunteers, but we all work as families who realize the importance, the vitality, the vital nature of this work, and to push it forward, and in fact produce results at the grassroots level. You see, and we need more support for this. Um, Inshallah, who knows? But we will keep going, and there is a lot to do, and there's a lot to digest. We look at our strategy is to look at a bottom up, top down model. Bottom up meaning going to and talking to the fishermen and saying, look, what are you doing? Here's what the Quran says about your relationship with Allah and your relationship with nature, which He's created. And go to the top and say to the ulama, the teachers, the madrasa teachers, it is your responsibility to incorporate, to integrate environmental teachings. When you go into the Quran and there's a verse which says, the plants and the trees bow in adoration. Yeah? Then you ask the children, what does God mean when He says that? You see, it means that in nature, you don't see a tree bowing in adoration. what that means is that the tree serves the purpose of what it's created for. And you can get very uh, sort of and ask a child what it means. And I did this exercise once, and yeah, a young boy put his hand up. And what does God mean when He says the tree? It means that the God provides the birds spaces for nests. It's a very simple mind. It's true, of course. You see, you get more scientific about it. It means that it locks carbon dioxide into its trunk. It holds the earth together by its roots. It creates the chlorophyll, by the action of sunlight. It creates oxygen, so on and so on. These are the kind of narratives that we want to sort of introduce into the minds of young people. So that I say to the top echelons of the scholarly, the ulama class, this is your responsibility. But in a sense, we've had limited success in one country, which I should mention, that is Indonesia. The Indonesians are very good at that. And they have transmitted this knowledge, uh, and most of the kind of Quran schools in Indonesia are, in fact, doing that today. And it's a good example to follow. I enjoyed the workshop. I thought it was a good initiative, a very good, positive initiative, uh, not just for environmental reasons, but also for political reasons, because there is a lot of instability in that area. And one of the things I thought when I was listening to the Israelis and the Palestinians talking about River Jordan, I thought, given the uh, political climate in that part of the world, how are they going to do it? But I was impressed by the optimism of the people who were there, particularly the Palestinians, I have to say. Um, and um, so, at the political level, it was it is positive, because of what is happening in the Middle East today, um, in terms of the ructions we see there. I don't need to go into detail. I think you know what I'm talking about. The common goal there was to celebrate creation, and that's so important, and to discover that there are great similarities in the way we celebrate creation is profound. So how can anyone not be there? How can anyone not be inspired by what went on? It's that important. And I feel that to be true also when people from other traditions also meet. I met with people in Far Eastern traditions as well. And we all have common goals, because no matter what our traditions are, we, in the end, empathize with nature, not just empathize with it. We are part of nature. You know, there is no objectivity in this. We are all subject. We are all part of nature. So, in that sense, there's a profound realization that we have a common goal in the preservation of creation, uh, in leaving something behind, as I've said before, for the next generation. That's so important. So, uh, in a way, um, we can have nuances of differences, but in a way, it is inspirational, because it brings people together, uh, like no other activity can, because we are dealing with a huge uh, issue in a critical moment in the history of the human race. For me to work with the Islamic community, um, all I need is the Islamic teachings on this, which is sufficient for me to make headway with them. But then, if I was working in an area like Israeli Palestine, Jordan River is a good example of why we should be working together. You see, in multi faith, I work a great deal in multi faith, like Indonesia, Christian and Muslim country. Uh, there are common issues where we can be working together. So, uh, in a multi-faith, multicultural community, these kinds of activities can only be positive because it looks at uh, a common inheritance, a common legacy, a common future, which is only to the good. You see, and if you present it in that way and people to be working together like that, like for Indonesia, there are villages, Muslims and Christian villages in alongside the rainforest. They have to work together. So you bring this ethic together and say, look, and they do. They understand that they can't be competing for resources. If they do, they destroy their own natural environment. They have to work together. So I think where there are mixed communities, working together is so important, and this is why initiatives like this are important. In that, it gives a fresh, open perspective about why people should be working together. Work together because it's a common inheritance. We are in a shared space. It does not belong to any one person, race, culture, religion, nationality. It belongs to all of us.